Hello. Thanks for once again allowing Lily Bear to take you beneath the crust, where I talk about what you're afraid to think about. I'm so glad you're back. The violent, non-violent civil rights movement. I hear many folks talking about how the non-violent Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would be upset about the violence of the youth movement. They go on to say that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a non-violent movement. Ready, aim, and fire. Ready. Well, we really can't know how the non-violent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. would react to these violent youth, as you call them. You see, the non-violent Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was violently killed during his non-violent civil rights movement. Knowing the fact that the non-violent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was violently killed during his non-violent civil rights movement, knowing that, come on, let's go in search of sanity while trying to define what is the definition of violence and non-violence. Aim. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., non-violent civil rights movement started in 1954. Let's look at some of the events that happened during Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. non-violent movement. And let's go in search of sanity to find out what's the definition of violence and non-violence. Fire. May 7th, 1955, Humphrey County, Mississippi. Non-violent Reverend Gregory Wesley Lee, Vice President of the Regional Council of Negro Leadership and an NAACP worker, was violently shot in the face and killed for urging Black Americans in the Mississippi Delta to vote. The violent, unidentified assailant fired 3 shotgun blasts to non-violent Reverend George Wesley Lee's face. This happened during the non-violent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s non-violent civil rights movement. Are you going with me? Are you going with me in search of sanity to find a definition of violence and non-violence? August 13th, 1955, Brookhaven, Mississippi. Lamar Seligson Smith, 63-year-old non-violent farmer and World War II veteran, was violently shot in cold blood on the crowded courthouse lawn in Brookhaven, Mississippi, for urging Black Americans to vote. This happened during the non-violent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. non-violent civil rights movement. Emmett Lewis Till, August 28, 1955, Money, Mississippi. Non-violent 14-year-old Emmett Lewis Till was violently murdered by violent Rob Bryant and J.W. Millum because of a lie told by Carolyn Bryant. The non-violent Emmett Till was violently kidnapped, violently beaten beyond recognition, violently shot in the head behind his left ear, violently had a large metal fan tied to his neck with barbed wire, and violently thrown into the Tallahatchie River. This happened during Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s non-violent civil rights movement. Join me as I go in search of sanity on what is the definition of violence and non-violence. Gulf Courts, Mound Bayou, Mississippi, November 15th, 1955. Non-violent Gus Courts, was a black grocery store proprietor and a black civil rights leader. In 1953, nonviolent Gus Courts and nonviolent Reverend George W. Lee founded the Humphreys County, Mississippi chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. After nonviolent Reverend George Wesley Lee was shot and killed, nonviolent Gus Courts dared to lead 22 nonviolent black Mississippians to vote in a tiny Delta town, which was called Bloody Belzoni. With a name like that, you know what's coming, right? Weeks later, not far from where Reverend George Wesley Lee had been shot with shotgun blasts, night riders opened fire on nonviolent Gus Courts, who almost bled out. Nonviolent Gus Courts had to be rushed to a black hospital 80 miles away. He survived, and he and his wife fled Mississippi. 1955 was violently popping. Nonviolent Emmett Till, nonviolent Reverend George Wesley Lee, and nonviolent Mr. Lamar Singersley Smith were all violently murdered in 1955. Nonviolent Gus Courts was violently shot but didn't die in 1955. I'm sure black residents of Mississippi were going in search of sanity while wondering just how much more nonviolence can they stand. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? Ask Hannah Saturday, Jacksonville, Florida. We're in the 1960s now. 20 nonviolent black children from the Jacksonville Youth Council, most of them were middle and high school students, just sat on a counter, just sat there. These were children. Outside the doors of the diner where these black children sat, they sat at a counter. An angry, violent mob of over 200 white males carrying baseball bats and the handles of axes were gathering. There, the nonviolent youth, the nonviolent young black children, peaceful protest ended abruptly when a violent white mob of grown males attacked these children. The violence from the violent white males spread to the downtown streets of Jacksonville and soon included any nonviolent black person downtown. They weren't sitting at the counter. They didn't even know what was going on, but they were attacked. The police did nothing to protect the nonviolent black children. A group of black men called the Boomerangs came to protect the nonviolent black children. Then and only then did the violent police become involved. They joined the violent mob. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? In search of sanity, I go. September 25th, 1961. Nonviolent farmer Herbert Lee was shot and killed in Liberty, Mississippi by Violet E. H. Hurst, a member of the Mississippi State Legislature. Violet Hurst murdered Lee because of his participation in the voter registration campaign sweeping through southwest Mississippi. Am I insane for going in search of sanity? By asking, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? Am I insane? June 9th, 1963, nonviolent Fannie Lou Hamer violently arrested, violently beaten in Winona, Mississippi. They had just come back from a voters' education meeting. I'm still searching for the definition of violence. June 12th, 1963, Jackson, Mississippi, NAACP State Director, nonviolent Medgar Evers was gunned down in his driveway. His wife and children were inside the house. Nonviolent Medgar Evers was shot by rifle-wielding violent Byron D. Law Beckman. The nonviolent Medgar Evers was fighting to get the right to vote for blacks in Mississippi. Are you understanding by now why I'm in search of sanity on what the definition of violence and nonviolence is? September 15th, 1960, Birmingham, Alabama. 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed by the violent KKK. Nonviolent Denise McNair, 11. Nonviolent Addie Mae Collins, 14. Nonviolent Kara Robertson, 14. And nonviolent Cynthia Wesley, 14. 4 beautiful, innocent, nonviolent black girls were violently killed. More than 20 nonviolent church members were injured. 4 violent members of the Ku Klux Klan planted at least 15 sticks of dynamite attached to a timing device beneath the front steps of the church. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? Neshoba, Mississippi, 1964. Nonviolent, James Chaney. Nonviolent, Andrew Goodman. And nonviolent, Michael Schwanner, I think that's how you pronounce his name, no disrespect intended, were killed in what came to be known as Freedom Summer. They had come to Mississippi because the violent Ku Klux Klan had burned Mount Zion Church because the nonviolent minister had allowed it to be used as a meeting place for nonviolent civil rights activists. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, Selma, Alabama. On the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, violent state troopers, violent sheriff deputies, and county violent members violently attacked 600 nonviolent civil rights marchers, leaving many of them injured and bloodied, and some of them unconscious. Again, I gotta ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? June 6, 1966, James Meredith. Nonviolent James Meredith, a veteran, was the first Black American student admitted to the segregated University of Mississippi. Nonviolent James Meredith walked by himself 220 miles from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. He wanted to bring attention to racism in America. Also, he wanted to rid himself of the fear that whites had put in him over the years. The nonviolent James Meredith marched to encourage Black people to vote after the 1956 Voting Rights Act. On the second day of his nonviolent march, nonviolent James Meredith was violently shot by violent Aubrey Novell. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? In Search of Sanity. April 4th, 1968, Memphis, Tennessee. The nonviolent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was violently assassinated. The man who some say would be upset about this violent youth movement. The nonviolent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was a leader in the nonviolent civil rights movement. His views of equality didn't sit well with some people. The nonviolent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and violently killed by violence. I'm still in search of sanity on what is the definition of violence and nonviolence. Violent policemen in Birmingham, Alabama, aimed high-powered hoses and 6 snarling violent dogs on Black women, Black men, and even children who wanted just one thing, to be treated like humans. In addition to these murderers, violence persisted throughout. Violence persisted through violent mass arrests, violent jail beatings, violent lynchings, and violent church bombings. Again, I ask, what is the definition of violence and nonviolence? Because after all, we were told that this was a nonviolent movement. The nonviolent Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said that violent rioting is the voice of the unheard. Holla, if you hear me. Thanks for allowing Lily Bell to take you beneath the crust. I'm just trying to create a dialogue to create a plan of action. Keep on churning till the butter come. Albert C. Richardson, a Black man, patent the butter churn, U.S. patent number 446470, February 17th, 1891. I'm Lily Bell. I'm just trying to create a dialogue. I'll leave you with this. If they close my book, you remember my story. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and oh yeah, stay tuned. A Nat Turner Runner production. Lock and load. Lily Bell. Be encouraged.